Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm ZS Caravallo from ZK Research, and I'm here for another thought leadership ZKast. I've got my good friend Bob O'Donnell, who runs tech analysis research. Bob and I were both at the AWS reInvent show, and so we're going to do some analysis at the event. Bob, before we start, though, just give us a quick intro to who you are, what you do, what your company does.
Sure. Thanks, Zias. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. So I've been a tech industry analyst for over 20 years. I spent the first 14 and a half at IDC, where I managed all the device research. And then 9 years ago, as of like tomorrow, I started technalysis research to broaden my scope and view. And now I look across major technology trends and important issues, everything from 5G to semiconductor foundry stuff, all across the board, and trying to find the links between all these things and how they fit together. So pleased to have the opportunity to chat with you about reInvent.
Well, we had similar paths. It was 11 years ago I left Yankee Group. And the one thing I'll say about you, Bob, is I always consider you the best dressed analyst at every event.
I'm not showing it today, man. I should have.
Although I'm sporting the reInvent hoodie, so which I thought was actually kind of nice. So now this was the 11th reInvent, the first full one. They did have one last year, but they had capped the attendance at 20,000. This is the first one where they allowed the masses back, and I heard different numbers for attendance, but at minimum it was 40, at peak it was 70, I think, or something like that. So just overall impressions of the show.
Well, it was actually my first reInvent. In previous years, unfortunately, I'd had a conflict with another event that happens to happen in Hawaii at the same time. And,
that's a tough choice.
But I went with Hawaii. What can I say? But no, it was interesting. And I didn't spend a whole lot of time over where the trade show portion was, but I talked to a lot of people who did. And what was fascinating, it did sound like it was absolutely packed, like to the density of pre-COVID CES days, which we all know what that is like. And it was just obviously smaller because it wasn't quite as many locations as CES, but clearly a huge amount of momentum there. Obviously also a reflection of the fact that people are eager to get back to live events. A lot of excitement around what AWS is doing and just, cloud in general. I mean, it's interesting. You've been doing cloud a lot longer than I have. And so I've kind of come at it from a somewhat different angle than you, but it's always amazing to me, there's the people who've been doing cloud a long time like you, and, it's sort of old news, but reality is for the vast majority of the world, what's the numbers? 25 or 30% of workloads are in the cloud. The other 70 are still not. Yeah. So there's so many things that are still going on that are frankly fresh and new for a lot of companies. And to me, to see it all kind of start to come together in really interesting ways, and the level of detail and specificity that now AWS has gotten into in terms of the services, in terms of the compute instances, and some of the things that I've been looking at, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and it's funny, I sort of bookended my year with Vegas because the first event last year was CES, obviously first week, and it was kind of a ghost town. I did a panel with somebody from Zoom, and we were joking that we were just happy that we had more attendees than panelists, right? And I'd never seen Vegas, frankly, that empty for a show. And but now we closed the year out, or nearly closed it out, and it was completely the opposite, because I did spend a lot of time at the Venetian, and I can tell you it was like pre-COVID CES where it was wall to wall. And to your point of most of the workloads being still on-prem, I do think, and we can transition to key themes for the show. One of the interesting themes, I think, was just that the cloud's nobody questions anymore, can you run this in the cloud? Can you run that in the cloud? Last year, NASDAQ announced that they were going to be running in the cloud. This year, I think the Options Exchange said they're moving all their operations to the cloud. It used to be that you couldn't run real-time apps like Contact Center. Well, TalkDesk runs on AWS. AWS has their own Contact Center product as well. And so I don't know if there's any more objection to, can this run in the cloud? Now it comes down to companies' willingness to move data into a public area, although you can do private cloud and things like that. So I thought, this reInvent was kind of a rebirth, I guess, for reInvent coming out of COVID. But in some ways, it was a rebirth for the legitimacy of cloud, because it doesn't seem like there's really any questions anymore.
No, Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And, the thing that really struck me, because I've certainly been watching some of this other stuff from the side, despite this being my first reInvent. What was fascinating was, they made Adam Selipsky made the new CEO made the point that, they're so customer obsessed and they're just focused on doing all these things that customers have. And it kind of dawned on me that the diversity of customers that they now have is pretty reflective of the diversity of enterprise computing in general. And just as all of these different companies have different needs and different workloads and what have you, what Amazon has done, what AWS has done is now kind of made all these very specific variations or feature additions or what have you to make it as easy as possible for as wide a degree of customers as possible. And so some of these things were kind of really down in the weeds, but they're clearly going to be important to a certain group of types of customers. And again, when you have a lot of customers, you get a lot of features, a lot of capabilities.
Yeah. Another interesting theme I thought was just, the integration of AWS stuff. Historically, when I think of AWS, I think of, here's a bunch of Lego building blocks, go build whatever you want. And some people were good at building the stuff, but I thought like one of the announcements was Aurora and Redshift integration. Yeah. One's a database, one's a database analytics tool. No one actually buys one without the other, right? So they actually coupled the two very tightly together, which makes sense. And so, I think when you look at their portfolio today, they're always going to make the building blocks for the people that want to build. They've rolled out a number of SaaS applications, things like Connect and their new supply chain app. But now they're starting to do more kind of pre-built components, right? It's like here, it's not a full Lego, but it's the house and the castle, and you can put them in whatever configuration you want, right? So, I thought that was an interesting thing. What else did you pick up on there?
Well, and to that, following up on that, this notion of glue, of connecting those pieces together was a big theme throughout as well, right? And so you had them supporting more data types across different parts of their tools, right? Or the ability, like you said, to link things together to avoid some of the hassles that you've had to do in the past. That they're trying to get rid of. It's ETL, right? I always get that acronym wrong, but to trying to get rid of the hassles of having to deal with sucking data out of one place and sending it to another, not to mention the costs that get associated when you have to try and move data sometimes across these tools. So a lot more of that, a lot more willingness to talk about on-prem stuff. I mean, they introduced Outpost a couple of years back, but it always felt like, well, yeah, okay, I guess we'll do it. But because they were early on, it was all about the cloud. They've recognized they've got to balance that, and I felt like there was more open discussion from them about, hey, we know you're going to run things in various places for different reasons, and we're going to help you enable that and pull these things together. We're going to support different types of data formats. We're going to support different types of capabilities. We're going to allow your data scientists to more easily, talk to your DevOps folks in terms of how they're building all these kinds of little connector pieces in between the components that they've built in the past as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the customer obsession, because I do remember when they rolled out Outpost, and in the analyst Q&A, someone asked Andy Jassy, you guys have been so staunchly opposed to on-prem infrastructure. Why'd you roll it out? And his answer was simple. It goes, because our customers wanted us to. So every one of our large customers wanted us to go into hybrid, so we rolled it out. And and I do think that's why AWS has maintained the size of the lead it has on the field. In fact, I was talking, or in Adam's keynote, he said that they've had 119 price reductions in 15 years. And it's interesting that there are groups within AWS whose job it is to make sure the customer spends less next year than they do this year, right? And so they'll look at the type of storage you have. Maybe you should be running on, a different type, a cheaper tier of storage or whatever. But invariably, what happens? The customer winds up spending more because they spend less. And I think, when I think of Google, I think of a company who almost pre-assumes their customers want to run like Google, which not all of them do. And, Microsoft has a bit of that attitude too, but I always found AWS to really, of all the hyperscalers, they really do listen to their customers.
They do. I think it's interesting. I will say the one big difference, of course, is you didn't hear Amazon talk a whole lot about tools to move workloads from them to other cloud providers, as we've heard the other guys do. So that's certainly a difference. They're not a big believer. They're certainly buying into hybrid cloud. They're not necessarily buying into multi-cloud, even though
no, they're not.
You and I both know that that's the reality of the world today, but we'll see what happens there. But no, you're right. And it's interesting because, and one of the things I look at is, the compute instances, the EC2 stuff, the different types of things they have, combinations of new silicon and different or existing silicon from Intel and AMD and NVIDIA GPUs, what have you. And a lot of the new things that they brought out on the instance side were things that were designed to deliver better performance per watt. Because again, like you said, hey, if they reduce the amount of money they spend on this workload, oh, wait a minute, we still have 70% more of these other workloads we can bring over. So that's, in the end, ultimately works to their advantage. But on the instance side, one of the things that was really interesting to watch, and this has been a theme they've had over the last couple of years, is custom silicon, right? So more and more, again, this gets to that notion of how specialized and how mature AWS has become, because they're creating their own silicon. They've got the Graviton 3E now, which is, ARM-based CPU. They have the Inferentia 2, which is their training silicon, and then they have the Nitro 5, which is their network accelerator for the I/O stuff. So all three pieces of new silicon, all new instances associated with them, and all for very specific purposes, right? For HPC stuff with Graviton 3E, but for the HPC instances that require, they are using AI or ML models that run across thousands of cores. So you've got to get performance per core and performance per watt way down. Otherwise, your costs get out of hand. So they recognize we have these huge models now, the large language models and other things like that require this scaling capability. And so you saw that. And then for things like Inferentia, similar sort of thing, where they've got to be able to run inferencing across, thousands and thousands of cores. So they've got to reduce, the power for that and reduce the cost per inference, but of course, increase the number of inferences, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, that was interesting as well, to kind of see how they're increasingly specialized and focused, and how custom silicon is becoming a big part of their overall story.
Yeah, they've got both purpose-built silicon, like you said, for inferencing, but they got general purpose, with the Graviton. And it seems in both cases, their price performance is better than what you can buy off the shelf.
Exactly. And that's, and that's been a big deal for them. And it was fascinating. I will say that, it's interesting as a guy who's covered, silicon-based stuff for a long time. And when the early talk of moving to ARM-based servers, whether it was in the cloud or on-prem, happened, everybody's like, yeah, that sounds great in theory, but, converting the code from x86 to ARM, it's a deal killer. It's not going to happen. But I was sat in on a couple of sessions with some of their big customers, people like DirecTV and Stripe and some others. And, they're talking about the fact that, look, if I'm building a cloud native modern app, containerized, microservice based, the whole kit and caboodle, a lot of the development tools, frankly, it doesn't really matter what ISA they're running on. It's just a couple of switches that you flip, whether you run it on x86 or you run it on ARM. And it kind of was a bit of an eye-opener to me to make me realize, wow, there is a lot of opportunity, especially if I'm building these newer apps, to be able to run it on ARM, hence all the emphasis we've seen Amazon place on Graviton, which is, is the ARM-based thing. So that was another kind of eye-opener for me in terms of this particular show.
Yeah, one of the other interesting product announcements I thought they had, as I mentioned, this was the supply chain software, and it's less about what the app is and more about their approach to software, because they're one of the biggest companies in the world. They've homegrown a lot of their apps, and I think where they feel their app is differentiated in the industry, at least where the customers tell them it is, they're rolling those out now as SaaS apps. And so Connect was one they did a couple of years ago, where their contact center is one of the biggest. I think it's over 100,000 agents now. And so none of the other cloud contact centers could actually even approach that. In this case, AWS is renowned for its supply chain. Even as a customer, when you go online and you look that your package will be delivered by 5 o'clock that day, if it's 5:05 and it's not here, you're genuinely shocked and surprised. Right.
Yeah, right.
Right. And but that's how good their supply chain management has gotten. And so if for those watching that haven't seen it, they actually took that internal application, they flipped it around and made it customer facing. And I do think that in some ways that's a shape of things to come for Amazon, is they've got all these homegrown apps and they can take one, make them customer facing. So while we think of AWS as an IaaS company, I do think they're also building a pretty big SaaS portfolio, which I think will be really interesting to watch, because I do think they have some technical advantages over some of the other SaaS providers. So
yeah, no, it's a great point. And of course, obviously, I mean, the whole history of AWS is, it came from being an internal tool in the first place, right? So
yeah. That's true.
It is consistent to see them, essentially doing this and taking their own stuff and bringing it to other places. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and again, not all of this was brand new, but it really kind of hit me how much effort they're making in terms of trying to make AI and ML a little bit more democratized. They introduced SageMaker, I think it was last year, or maybe 2020. I can't remember.
I think it was 2 years ago. Yeah.
But the point is, they continue to refine it. They continue to add extensions to it to bring more people into the world of AI and ML modeling. And low code, no code stuff. They had the new, and I'm spacing on the name of it, but there's a new tool essentially, that lets you kind of automatically build some simple ML stuff in your apps. It was really a great example of how they're taking what used to be, just relegated to very specifically trained, data scientists to a much broader audience. And I think that's going to be important because A, there's not that many data scientists in the world that people can hire, number one, and B, there's clearly a lot of opportunities for AI and ML to influence things in, it's maybe not a dramatic way, but still an important way.
Yeah, actually, I thought within the AIML too, the service cards and model cards.
Yes.
I thought those were pretty interesting too, because the service cards were meant for AWS built models. And again, for those not familiar, it uses some AI, funnily enough, to ingest a bunch of information from the model, and then it produces a card. It's not really a card, but it's a spec sheet that gives you a lot of information about how the model is built, the type of bias that could be in it, assumptions that were made, and security parameters. And so, from a governance perspective, a responsible AI perspective, this gives AI practitioners a very quick look into Amazon built models, which are the service cards, and then homegrown ones, which are the model cards. And so, I think they're them looking at these things more holistically around, it's not just the use of it, but you got to make sure that you're being used responsibly. You got to make sure the governance is being held. I thought actually was in itself pretty interesting itself. So
yeah, no, absolutely agree.
Yeah. Another interesting sort of announcement I thought was the OCSF security standard, and other companies have tried it before. No one's really done this successfully. I did think it was funny in Adam's keynote when he said we're the first vendor to support the standard. It's like, okay, you created the standard, so I hope you are. But then I was on the show floor, and and I talked to Clint Sharp from Cribble, one of the observability companies, and he actually is very supportive of it. They actually announced their own press release that they're supporting it as well. And he said whether it's the right standard or not, at least it's somebody trying to bring a level of standardization to security. And I think Palo and Fortinet are also announced that they'd be supporting as well. So maybe it'll actually work this time, because the one thing I can tell you with security is there's an awful lot. Everybody talks about security data lakes, but there's no such thing. You end up having a bunch of data ponds.
Right.
Sometimes you can see them through one pane of glass, but they're not connected. But this actually gives the opportunity to connect. So it's a function of their size, I suppose, and also the breadth of ecosystem. And I think one of the reasons why AWS actually has a chance of pulling this off is because, to me, Google, through their Mandiant acquisition of Microsoft, are actively competing with a lot of these security companies, where AWS is taking much more of an ecosystem approach, where they'll offer some security tools, but they're really trying to enable their security partners to thrive. And that's a much different approach.
No, you're right. And one of the other, and it brings up another interesting theme that, again, for me, as my first reInvent that was not exactly what I expected, because you think of AWS as basically trying to, in some cases, boil the ocean, right? I mean, they have 600 different computing instances. They have, thousands of different services. It seems like there's so much there. It's so hard to kind of keep track of. And yet they also were surprisingly, in my mind, supportive of all the partners they have. And obviously that's reflected in the fact that the trade show is huge because they have a huge partner, but how much also, how much stage time and everything else they gave to their partners and customers throughout their various keynotes and events. It was a really big deal to see them focus on these external partners because they recognize as much as they are trying to do, they can't do it all. And it just shows the breadth of what they're trying to achieve, and their willingness to bring these other people in various ways, I think is a testament to them, maturing as a company and as an industry, frankly, for cloud computing.
One of the biggest myths I always hear about AWS is if you join the marketplace, you're simply letting AWS kill you. I can tell you from talking to marketplace participants and the people that run AWS Marketplace, they do not care whose product you buy, right? And in fact, last year at reInvent, I was at the Talk Desk booth, and they were thrilled to be running on AWS and part of the marketplace. And I'm like, aren't you concerned that they have a competing product, Connect? And then I was talking, one of the marketplace people was in it, and he said, look, I don't care which one he runs. You're spinning the AWS meter either way. And
right.
So this, if our product isn't good enough, then the customers are going to go buy something else. And so this makes our product team sharper. It makes them sharper, and so everybody winds up winning. But I do think that AWS doesn't understand that no matter who wins, they win, right? And so it's not in their best interest to hold back innovation from their partners.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And like I said, that became clear because I had been somewhat under that myth of it being difficult and challenging, perhaps, to work with AWS. You get subsumed into the to the mothership, as it were. But no, that was clear that they were doing a lot more on the partner side than I originally anticipated they would be.
All right, Bob. Well, this is we're coming up to the end here, and this was your first reInvent, and so I think it was a positive experience for you. As we look ahead, you've got a long history in computing, and as we look ahead into 2023, what are some of the things that you expect to see from AWS, or you'd like to see some AWS next year?
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm personally very interested in has been private 5G. And AWS did announce a private 5G service at reInvent last year. It's still kind of being developed, I think. So I think we're going to see a lot more on private 5G next year from them. And it plays into the whole edge and hybrid story. So I think that'll be interesting. I'm curious because I can't imagine, if they truly are customer obsessed, that they're not eventually going to have to do something about multi-cloud. So, I'm going to make a small Las Vegas wager here that they do something on multi-cloud at Invent 2023. But in general, I just think it's that continued maturation of the model. And again, I'm personally very interested in what they do with private 5G.
Yeah, private 5G, I've obviously had a lot of interest in as well. Given the product like Snowball. In fact, they had a Snowball in the basketball hoop. I don't know if you saw that on the show floor, where it was two things I learned. It's a terrible basketball shot, and secondly, with one camera and a Snowball, you can do an awful lot of analytics because it had you taking 5 free throws, and then right away you'd see some analysis on it. But that's an obvious device to throw some kind of CBRS based exactly. 5G card in or whatever. So you're right there. What and I agree with you. I do think multi-cloud has got to be on the docket somewhere. Because one of the terms I've heard now is people talk about cloud repatriation, right? Where people are moving data back to on-prem or whatever. But I do think multi-cloud does. I think the one thing that's been proven over time is when customers have choice in the standardization, it drives up adoption, right? And so customers may be holding off until there is better multi-cloud. And so AWS could actually, being the biggest, make that happen. I also think that this trend we've seen of AWS rolling out SaaS services, I'm expecting to see more. And I think we'll probably see another one next year. I don't know what area it would be in. I would like it actually to be in procurement, because as a company that does business with AWS, I can tell you that procurement is very easy compared to some of the other legacy tools out there like SAP, Ariba, and things like that. So I'd like to see them make that customer facing. So if they're watching this, hopefully they'll do that. But I do think that they have so many internally built tools that I can't imagine that they're not going to roll out a whole line of business, SaaS products, whether it's HR or whatever. So
yeah, no, I agree. And actually, on that end, I mean, fascinating thing I think for you and me would be, frankly, they could offer a data tool that shows what type of instances, what type of applications people are using. That's going to give you a good sense of, hey, what are the actual trends in enterprise, right? If you have a survey of, if you have the usage and data of what AWS services are used, which instances are used, that would be a fascinating data set to look at and analyze in terms of overall industry trends. So not sure we're going to see that one, but it would be cool. All
right, Bob. Well, it sounds like it was a successful trip for you and for me. I want to thank you for joining me. This may be the last time I see you before the holidays. So, if I don't see you again, happy holidays to everybody watching. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time on another ZKast.